Okay, here we go again. Here's another talk on Einstein's relativity. This one's entitled Incompatibility of Einstein's postulates. That is the postulates of special relativity. So this is the usual translation referred to for Einstein's special relativity on his paper he published in 1905. I've complained in other talks that it was not properly translated, but that web address is the usual translation most people use. So the usual translation gives us, we will raise this conjecture, the product of which will hereafter we call the principle of relativity, to the status of a postulate, and also introduce another postulate which is only apparently irreconcilable with the former, namely that light is always propagated in empty space with definite velocity c, which is independent of the state of motion of the emitting body. Other translations give something similar, or inferring that Einstein is providing some math that unifies these two postulates. What I usually complain about is Einstein's light speed postulate is unclear what is supposed to be meant, but putting that issue aside, whatever is supposed to be meant by light speed postulate is being combined with the relativity principle in the maths that Einstein provides. But now, as Stephen Bryant explains, that maths does not work. Now this is the relevant talk given by Stephen Bryant, and he was looking for the simplest way of explaining that Einstein's relativity doesn't work, and he's come up with showing that Einstein's maths gives you 1 equals 0. So now summarising that maths from that talk, these are the equations we have from Einstein. You just treat it as funny Greek letters and so forth. These four equations are supposed to be consistent with each other, and what we can do is you can check that by introducing some values into those equations for t, v and x, and so we choose some simple values of t equals 0, v equals 0 and x equals 1, and we substitute that into these equations to see if those equations work. So if we substitute v into this equation for beta, what comes out is that beta equals 1, and if you then substitute beta equals 1 into the following two equations for tau and z, that then gives these simple little equations at the bottom. With these simple equations we can now substitute t equals 0, v equals 0 and x equal 1 into them to see what they give, and that gives tau as equal to 0 and z is equal to 1. And now we also have the equation for z equals c times tau. So for tau equals 0, that gives c is equal to 0. Thus the values t equals 0, v equals 0, x equals 1 gives z is equal to 0 and 1. i.e., in other words, it's giving you that 1 equals 0, and if we try other values of t, v and x into these equations we get other nonsense. So the equations given by Einstein are thus not consistent, and you can't reasonably accept that 0 equals to 1. Thus his maths is at fault and is wrong. Thus when Einstein claims the two postulates are apparently irreconcilable, that is false, because his math has not shown how they are reconcilable. going by his maths, have 1 equals 0, the postulates are actually irreconcilable, i.e. incompatible, not just apparently incompatible, they are incompatible. Einstein thought he'd reconciled the two postulates, but he didn't because his math is wrong. And we can go further. So Einstein, in his 1905 paper, thought he had discarded the ether, and he hasn't done that either because his maths was wrong. So physics built on Einstein's 1905 work has collapsed, and by that I mean how they understand Einstein's postulates. Because when I look at Einstein's paper in German and try to translate it into English, I think the mainstream have misunderstood what Einstein was talking about. So what the mainstream think they believe is all false, basically. They're going by faulty maths and a faulty understanding of what Einstein was talking about. So how will the mainstream react to that? As I pointed out in previous talks, the mainstream establishment keeps sweeping certain things under the carpet. In other words, any problems they have, they just want to ignore it, especially if it comes from Einstein. Any problems with what Einstein says, they just want to ignore that. Thank you. Finished. That's the end of this talk.